Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome back to State of Current Affairs with your two hosts, Lillian S. Cauldwell and Viki Esther Chang from Singapore. And of course, Lillian is from the United States, Pennsylvania to be exact. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Media Network, LLC, Educate, Enlighten, and Entertain. And on today's program episode, Viki Esther Chang and Lillian Cauldwell will basically discuss about the chemicals or chemical traces, be that as it may, found in salmon, which in the ocean isn't too much of a surprise because of the pollution there, but it's found in the farm-raised ones. Well, Houston, we have a problem. The other problem facing our civilization today is the fertility rate. And while the poorer people and the immigrants don't seem to have that problem, the rest of the known world, especially in the Western nations, seem to be having a problem. Houston, we have a second problem. So to delve into these two separate but equal problems, I'm going to start with Viki. Good morning, Viki. Good evening.
Hi, and good evening here, right here in Singapore. It is 9:42 p.m. On a Tuesday evening. It's a wonderful, warm, but a little bit humid weather here. Right here, 1 degree north of the equator. It's always welcoming to the world. Singapore is one of the smallest countries in the world, besides the Vatican. We've got the latest census population showed that there is about slightly over 6 million inhabitants, citizens here, and residents here, and that does not include a couple of millions of, I should say, immigrants, or I would say that professional residents working here. So this is a beautiful country. I welcome everyone to be here. And my first article today has got so much to do with this island. Okay, according to the latest published data from Statista, which is an online statistic company, it says that the 20 countries in the world with the lowest fertility rate 2024. It states the list of countries with the lowest fertility rate for this year, according to data compiled by Statista. And here it says the number one country in the world, I'm talking about like almost over 197 countries in the world. Taiwan's, if it is considered a country, Taiwan's fertility rate is number one, the lowest in the world, estimated at 1.11 children per woman or per couple, which is the lowest in the world, because we do know that the replacement rate is about 2.11 for replacement of the population. So the first country in the world, if we consider Taiwan as a country, that's the first country in the world that has the lowest children per woman. And number two is South Korea, coming in at 1.11 also, so they are tied. Hey, and number three in the world, I mean, this is a good ranking or not, Lillian? It's Singapore at 1.2 children per woman, and coming in as the first European or Asian country, Ukraine at 1.2. That's the country at war right now. And then you've got Hong Kong at 1.2, Macau at 1.2, etc., etc. And the first European country that has the lowest fertility rate or childbirth rate per woman is Italy with 1.3, followed by Spain 1.3, Poland 1.3. So they tie there. And we've got Mauritius, African country, Mauritius, etc., etc., etc. So, Lillian, a little bit about since we are in the top 10 here, I've got to explain a little bit about what's happening in Singapore. And according to my own knowledge as a Singaporean woman, the fertility rate. Now, if you take away Taiwan as a country, which China wants it not to be a country, then South Korea will be 1.1, it's number one, and number two will be Singapore. Let's talk about the characteristics, the similarity of characteristics in these top three or top four countries where we've got Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, Macau. Now, these are the Asian countries that has only about 1.1 to 1.2 child per woman. And you know that for a couple to replace or population replacement rate, you need to have 2.11, about there, 2.1, 2.11 for population replacement. That's for the healthy geographical kind of shape. You need that to happen. So the characteristics amongst these countries, it's quite outstanding. Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong, Macau. Now, these are really, really small countries. And these are countries that that are characterized by a very high, I should say, a very high density rate per square meter. People live very closely together. And they are the countries where the economy is so much dependent on the people's productivity and not so much on natural resources like oil, timber, etc. And these countries are cosmopolitan countries. They are almost a city state themselves. Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Macau. And not only that, the country has got a high metabolism rate. I mean, we are working like crazy, like nuts. So these are the things that it's outstanding to me. It's not exactly astonishing that Singapore rates top 2 in the world for the lowest level of fertility. We have got that for the last 10, 20 years. But what stands out is Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, and now South Korea. These are countries, number one, where women are working really, really hard because we need to support the economy. Now, let's delve into myself first, and then about Singapore, and then about the similarities between these 4 Asian city-states. Number one, I work really hard. I've got a high level of education. I believe in the independence of me financially, economically. I do not want to depend on a man. I do not depend on my parents, and definitely I do not depend on handouts. I want to be able to show that I've got a career, a job that is respectable, that I can actually work up the social ladder or the professional ladder, and that I can be financially independent or financially well off. I think for a country like this, it's not um, uh, it's not uncommon for women to actually put their career first, or their profession first, or their education first. This is a country that depends on people. I mean, a country like Hong Kong, Singapore, we've got very little natural resources. It depends on the labor force to actually support the productivity and the growth of the economy. We do not have natural resources like oil and gas, timber, or anything that we can export. even Taiwan, probably a little bit of food from Taiwan. But really, countries like this depend on both men and women to really champion the growth of an economy. So, myself, I don't have any children. My husband and I, we don't have any children. It's a decided factor. Um, in the first earlier part of our marriage, that hey, we will not have any children. It's a little bit of disappointed on my husband's part, but for me, my peers, a lot of us actually do not want to have children in Singapore. Number one, it is really expensive to have a child. Medical expenses, expenses to bring your children up, livelihood, and because of the work pressure, you do not have time to even think about yourself. And a lot of people are going single, actually, Lillian. Marriage is actually being postponed, and the age of production is actually being postponed. The age of procreation is postponed because we are thinking of number one, getting yourself financially stable, getting yourself a home, possibly making sure you got the car, the credit card, the condo, and then all the C's that you've got, right? Making sure that you've got all these first, and then you tell yourself, "Am I ready?" I don't think I'm ready mentally or emotionally because I think it is not good enough to bring up a child if I feel inadequate. So the thinking of a modern woman in a country like this, in Singapore, we're always thinking of let's give the best for yourself. Let's give the best because we're given the best through the best education here. We want to make the best for ourselves in terms of our self identity, self worth, self actualization, self esteem. I think Singapore has been ranked. There was a study done some years back. Singapore has been ranked one of the most respectable women on earth because we're highly educated. I mean, thank God, right? Not about me, it's just about how it is. Drawbacks, of course, most highly educated, most well traveled, and most professional women in the world. So I am happy and humbly proud to say that. But there's a lot of drawback, Lillian. This is a population of 6 million. We started off at my time was about 3 to 4 million. So within my lifetime, about 20 years, it has grown double. And in order to support the growth of the GDP per year, X percentage, you need to work doubly hard, triply hard. You need to go up the ranks in the profession. So we are highly educated women, no time for herself, no time for dating, no time for marriage, postponing marriage, no time for dates, and you're really putting independence first, and you're putting your family first, your brothers, your sisters, your parents. You want to make sure that you're bringing back the best. So you put yourself last in a family situation, and you can kind of replicate throughout the population of 50% of the population. We need 50% of the population to be working out there, to be hustling, to be retraining ourselves, to be upskilling, getting as much as possible from our education, making sure that we support the corporations who are being employed, making sure you are answerable to your bosses 24/7. So there are no time for dates. There's no time for happiness. I have to say, we have been ranked one of the most highly stressed working population in the world just a couple of weeks ago, and that's sad. That puts a woman, well, it's always, I should say, there's pros and cons. You get to be really respected um, on the professional stage, in a professional setting. Um, we do not have a problem with women rising through the corporate ranks here in Singapore. We need the talent. We need people who are able to contribute. We don't have um, a lack of women being respected here. But I think because of that, we start to think once the childbearing age is over, 36, 38, 37, if you want to push it a little bit, 39, 40, well, that leaves you with very little probability of having a child. Plus the fact, Lillian, here, the regulation does not allow egg freezing. You can't freeze your eggs. There is no way you can freeze your eggs in Singapore because we do not have the facilities. It's regulated, or you are not. You can't do that. It's against the law. So if you want to have your eggs frozen, you got to fly to a country to get your eggs frozen. If you want to, but you do have fertility treatment here. So there again, one of the reasons why you don't have egg frozen here in this island, because there's a paradox again. You want the women to be able to have your child as early as possible, right? And not postpone that. Because once you think that you can freeze something, like your meat or your eggs in the freezer, you kind of like don't think about it. So again, there's a paradox for women. You work really hard, but the childbearing age comes up. You don't have time to date. You don't have time to meet your husband. Um, then so what? So therein lies that big, huge irony or the paradox whereby you support the company, you support your profession, you support everyone else, your clients, your customers, your colleagues, your family, and also the country for the growth of the GDP per year. And then at the end of the day, you realize that, hey, the childbearing age is really long gone. And you know what? We've got a problem with adoption. We don't have a route for adoption, and very little children are being born anyway, so you don't have a lot of children to be adopted. If you need to get adoption, you need to go to another country whereby there isn't a very straightforward procedure because it is made in such a way that, or I should say that it is not made in such a way that you have that straight line or a roadmap to get children adoption. So this is the scenario or the similarity of characteristics I see throughout these high-ranking countries like Macau, Taiwan. If you count Macau as a country, then it leaves with Singapore and South Korea. So these are the countries that really are looking at championing the economy and very little policies to support um, women. But however, I have to say that let me dial back a little bit. There also incentives if you do have a child in Singapore. You will have up to 15 or 12, 15 Singapore dollars given to you um, for the first child. I think there's so many policies out there, and there's also different kinds of policies whereby the government match dollar to dollar that you invest in your child. For example, you decide to have an account for your child, the first or second child, right? Of course, the more children you have, the more financial incentive the government will give to you. So again, therein lies the paradox, right? You have that amount of education. It doesn't mean that it should stop you from having a family, starting a family, or should stop you from having your children, because there are policies in place that tries to help you financially. Like if you have a second child, a third child, the financial incentives from the government increases. If you have a bank account that you pledge to have an X amount of dollars up to like 20,000, the government matches you and put in that amount of money in your bank. I think it's almost unheard of in many countries. However, from the perspective of a woman in Singapore who is highly educated, I think a lot of us are here in Singapore. There's no way out. You've got to be educated here because that's the only route that you've got. You will find that you will always place a career development before itself, and of course,
before your family. Sad to say, but that's the way it is. And not only you've got bank accounts supported by the government that puts in your bank, there are new incentives like um, parental leave, for example. Um, the problem is generally the climate for modern women like myself will always feel it's tough environment to raise a child because you've got so little time. You're competing for time. You're competing for the luxuries, almost like a luxury to start a family here. So it's almost the same as like in Germany, right? Germany is facing an aging population because Germany places economic growth as number one for the country. So you've got a lot of old folks there in Germany without children, so they've only got pets at home, right? Same with countries that is highly industrialized. I would say that Singapore is highly industrialized. Small country, very little population. But number three, the first European country that has the lowest fertility for women is Italy. Now, it's not something that is surprising, but it's a different set of reasons because Italy, young people are fleeing the country. Italy, if you look at policies in the last 10, 20 years, they're giving away stone houses for $1. If you, as a foreigner, can come in to refurbish, rejuvenate, and renovate the stone house, the historical houses with a business plan, you can take that house for you forever for $1. Certain cities in Europe is already adopting that, but the problem with, or should say, the challenge with Italy is that young people are just fleeing diaspora of the Italian. So they are going to Spain, they go to different parts of Europe, they go to America, they go to Asia. So a different set of reason for low fertility rate in Italy. So you've got lots of towns that are just filled with old people. I mean, just like in different parts of Europe, France, Germany, of course, I've just said, because young people are fleeing. So again, different sets of reason for country like Singapore or a country like in Europe. Very quickly, let's delve into the second article before I say goodbye. And again, ladies and gentlemen, you are tuning in to State of Current Affairs with Lillian, Cauldwell, and myself, Viki, Esther, Chang, in Singapore. It's such a pleasure to be able to share some of these insights of various countries to you. And I hope that I'll be able to select very insightful articles, news articles for the listeners and the audience wherever you are. The second article, not something that we've not talked about, again, food security. Well, in certain countries, food is not a national security challenge at all. You've got an abundance of food. In certain countries, like in Singapore, food is a national security issue because if countries just stop the treaty and they stop the exportation of food into Singapore, we have got very little to rely on, very little food to rely on. So this article says that researchers found traces of chemical in salmon fillet. The makers of the Norwegian officials calculated that an adult would have to consume 3.9 tons of salmon every day before it being exposed as health risk. You can find this article in intrafish.com, intrafish.com, about salmon. Yes, we know that fish is already contaminated. Large fish in the oceans are already contaminated by mercury, oil, contaminants, plastics, heavy metals, whatever chemicals you can name it already in the fish. The food chain is already highly, highly dangerously polluted. It causes childhood growth and development problem. It causes problems in old people. It causes problem in people like us. We do not know what we're suffering from and why we're suffering from them, because it's already in the food chain. However, I would like to point out beyond this article that says certain chemicals is already in salmon. I'd like to point out that Norway is one of the largest exporter of salmon, but you can find salmon every part of the world as part of the agricultural crop. I would like to say that Norway, about 10 years ago, has already successfully grown salmon to three times its size in half the time. Now think about what we said yesterday, the industrialists, the agricultural industrialists. There are no more your farmers out there. There are people who are venture capitalists. They are investors. They want the best ROI, return on investment. So they are injecting growth hormones in our food. They're injecting anything that can make a fast buck and at 3 times the rate or 10 times the rate. So we as consumers are always at the tail end of the food chain or the tail end of the money food chain at the very end. You've got very little say because that process has already been inside, the manufacturing process or the production process already been embedded inside. There's nothing we can do, however, to just go into a grocery store, a supermarket, a mall, to just buy off whatever there is. I mean, we can't demand to have organic salmon anymore. And rarely can you hear about the term organic salmon or naturally grown salmon. We don't have that anymore. We don't have something that says this fish is organic, this fish is grown in clean waters. We don't have that, and we do not have the luxury. Now think about your children, your grandchildren. If at this stage our food chain is already badly contaminated, multiply or square it, right? Cube it. Multiply by 10, a factor of 10, the amount of contaminants that is unseen because they're on the molecular level that is going into the food chain of your children and your grandchildren. So I will end off here, Lillian. It's very, very serious. We're talking about food, water, the environment, climate change, agriculture, and this will be a very huge issue. Even in many countries to come. I mean, we're looking at childhood obesity. We're looking at a lot of different kind of diseases that is unheard of. Young children having cancer, for example. Where does it come from? I mean, a lot of diseases which were associated with old age is now getting younger and younger towards the younger population. So I rest my case, but I think enough said. The power is in the consumers. We need to make a lot of noise to demand cleaning up the food chain, cleaning up our water, cleaning up our ocean, and to demand good manufacturing and production practices. 2 articles for you. Over to you, Lillian. Thank you so much.
I think the biggest problem that we have as a world community is that all our combined problems have now settled in such a way that the pieces of plastic, drugs, chemicals have all spilled in together. And they have shown in the palm of a person's hand the breakdown that one can find now in the water, whether it's a stream or a river, whether it's the ocean, whether you're an island or a peninsula, and even in the soil, that everything is contaminated. Now, during the 1970s, it was brought to everybody's attention that our rain now had become an acid rain, that it no longer was pure water being drawn back up into the atmosphere and coming back down. And that was our first warning. Did anybody pay attention? No. They said it was fake science and don't believe it. And then what else came along? Well, my dad used to say, before you drink that water in the middle of the forest or hike along that trail with all nature, remember that the animals go to the bathroom in that same water. So what you consider fresh, pure, organic water is not. He says we're made up of chemicals in this world. And whether you recognize it or not, no matter how fast flowing that water is, it's not pure water any longer. There is a reason, folks, that after the collapse of the Roman Empire, nobody drank water in Europe or in Asia. They drank wine or beer. You want to know why? Because nobody drank water in the United States, for that matter. It's because the water was already polluted. It was no longer organic. And as a result, the only people who drank the water were the indigenous people, and they were very circumspect of how they drank it. I'm not going to say they boiled it first because they didn't have that type of knowledge. In fact, that type of knowledge didn't really come until the end of the 1800s, going into the 1900s. So all before that, you had people who used the water for making their beverages or for cooking their food or being contaminated by whatever means. And most of the time it was manure, which comes out of animals. I mean, if you're going to call a spade, let's get it out on the table. Let's call it what it is. There isn't anything pure anymore. And it started way before Adam and Eve ever showed up. When the first man came down from the trees, they were already distributing their food garbage all over the pristine land.
Yes, and let me interject again. I'd like to have this conversation with you. I would hope that, for the next sessions, we've talked about the environment, contaminants, etc. I would hope to delve in. My other pet topic is to talk about maybe certain herbs, certain food that you can get for detoxification, for metal detoxification. We call it chelation, or just natural, from the natural environment, from the natural food that you can get. We'll see how we can actually help in better for the betterment of your health. I hope that I can do that. So we've talked about the contaminants, and next we'll talk about some of the solutions that that there is out there they can get hold of for detoxification and for health, for maintaining and then health rejuvenation. I think I can do that. That's another one of my pet topics.
Okay. But the point of the matter is, folks, is that food has been contaminated since the beginning of time. And the question is, how does one handle it to make it more safe for the population to live and survive? Now, we know that a lot of the cooking that we now have today include recipes from long ago who use those recipes in order to survive the rotten meat because they had no way of keeping it fresh. So you have to go look into the history of cooking as to how and why people prepared food the way they did. In fact, when they do shows about the Tudors or the royal families, one of the things they keep pointing out is because of the trade with the East, China, Singapore, those countries. Of course, they weren't countries in those days, or a part of empires. But the idea was they brought spices and sugar into the common European diet. And as a result, it contaminated and attacked different parts of the body because the body had no defenses against those type of spices. Sugar, salt, they're all considered spices. Some of them are considered good for preserving. You need to look into the past to discover how we made it into our current 21st century, and then look at what we brought in from the 20th century, married it to what we know to the 21st century, and see how food will keep on evolving into the future of eating, which is a fascinating subject all on its own. However, you should know that these tiny little micros of plastic is not only in our plants and the soil, it's also in the food chain. So you will ingest it when you eat the deer that you just shot, or the bear that you just used your bow and arrow on, or the fish that you just caught. And let me tell you something, there are places in the United States within the ocean that they cannot fish anymore because there's no more fish. They've outfished the fish. And this is also true overseas. They don't talk about it as loudly as we do, but it's there, and you should be aware of that. As for fertility, Bill Clinton said it's the economy, stupid. And that's basically what it is. Women have the choice to either have kids or not. And let's face it, not all adults make good parents. Now, during the 1700s and the 1800s, parents were encouraged to have a large family because chances were their first 6 kids would be wiped out by virus, pandemics, epidemics, falls, because science was not abreast with taking care of anybody in medicine. So they wanted a lot of children for the ones who survived. We don't have that problem anymore. And even with the fertility rates being lower, we're still an overpopulated world, which means we have more people on this planet than we can legitimately feed and keep clothed, which is something else one needs to think about. Now, everybody knows that a certain generation, for better or for worse, have decided not to have children. It's an economic thing, which is fine. I understand that. I also know that adoptions are based on prejudice, ignorance, arrogance, and what you will be allowed to adopt or not to adopt. And it's usually the poorer countries that offer up children whose parents have died, whose parents or grandparents are killed during wars or famine, that they want these kids to be properly taken care of. And they always look to the wealthy Western nations. One of the biggest considerations in this country now, although they won't talk about it much, is that the immigrants from Central and South America have more children and are bearing children than white people. And the Republicans, to name a party, is scared to death that the Latinos will overtake the population. Well, I got bad news for them. Science fiction authors have been predicting this for the last 50 years. Where they've been, I don't know. And since America is not a native, primarily white country to start out with, I think they have the nerve myself. But prejudice, arrogance, thinking you're better than somebody else, it's not going to go away. But think about it. It's always the children. The firstborn, every child should be killed, especially if it's a boy, from the Egyptians. You don't have to come to America to be prejudiced. It started a long time ago. And let's face it, unless you're in a position to have children economically, It doesn't make sense to have them. When I put my kid through college with my husband's help, his education just for a 5-year degree was over $150,000. And we were lucky. He was smart enough to qualify for scholarships. But not every child is smart that way. I certainly wasn't. So I borrowed money to go through school, and it took me approximately 25 years to pay it off. But I paid it off. Great credit rating because of that. So I'm not complaining. But the fact of the matter is, you have to plan ahead. And if you cannot foresee yourself doing this for the next 18 years, may I suggest you don't even get started. And of course, pets are even more expensive than children these days. So don't think about getting a dog or a cat if you can't afford a child. Something to think about. Yes, we will wrap this up. So we spoke about fertility, and we spoke about the contaminants in farm-raised marine life, which is kind of scary because the whole reason why they started inventing and implementing farm-raised marine life was to keep it uncontaminated. But since the water in which it's being spawned is contaminated, it means that the marine life will become contaminated. So do you want to see this all over again? Of course you do. Come on, I'll get your little gray cells moving. You want to go over to https:// Passionate World Talk Radio Network.com / State of Current Affairs, or scroll down to the page, bottom where it says State of Current Affairs. Click on it, go over to the site, click on the Google link, and voila, just like magic, it takes you into the bowels of YouTube and the State of Current Affairs, plus many of our other podcast videos. You can also listen to it on Facebook.com / Passionate World Radio, YouTube.com / Passionate World Radio. This program is brought to you by 3 different companies. One is by a publishing company where they will help you write your memoirs and get them out there, because you learned an awful lot from the age of 5 all the way to maybe making it to 100. And you don't want them to repeat your mistakes. They can make their own, right? And add to the baggage. The next company is called MyFlex, and it is an artificial intelligence company, Ruby.ai. So go over to http:// and get all your questions answered there. And if you have additional ones, text me at 484-364-1032, or my email, pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. This also applies to the publishing company in Singapore, where you can text me and I'll make sure that the proprietor gets all the information they will need in order to help you get your words of wisdom out to the rest of the world and to any aliens that are living underneath the sea waters. And then last but not least, by Global Media Network LLC, that provides training, the obstacles of podcast training, 2-month course, 1 hour, 5 days a week, interactive, https:// education.passionateworldtalkradio.com / masterclass. 2 people for the price of 1. How easy is that? Pretty easy. Thank you all very much for listening, and have a great week. We'll see you next Monday. If you have any ideas for the state of current affairs, or you want your opinion heard, again, text us at 484-364-1032, or write us on pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com, and make a difference. Thank you all. Have a great week.